We're on Daf Chav Ches. The Omer Rabbi Loza, just a few lines down from the top, line 4. Miriam bin Ashika Mesa. We're going to derive from Xer Shava that the Misa of Miriam was also bin Ashika, like we saw by Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's based on Xer Shava. Asya Sham Sham Mimoshe. In both contexts, the Torah used the word Sham. Vatama Sham Miriam Batikover and Vayama Sham Moshe. And the Sham Sham equation is going to tell us that just like Moshe died bin Ashika, so too HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the life of Miriam bin Ashika. In the case of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah was pretty explicit about the fact that his mitzvah was that of Nashika. It doesn't have a parallel statement that's explicit about Miriam. It's a little bit disparaging to talk about a misas Nashika with regard to a woman. Omar Rabbi Ami, Lama Nismacha Misas Miriam Leparshas Para Duma. Why the connection between Para Duma and Miriam in Parshas Chukas, Lomar L'cha, to teach us, Ma Para Duma Mechaperes, Af Misa Misasan Shal Tzadikam Mechaperes. Now, this has to do with the status of Para Duma. Para Duma is really a process of tahara. It's not what you call a karban with the classic mechaper, the kapara element, but the Torah does use the word chatas to describe the mayim of the paradu that's used for the Torah of paradu. And the Gemara in many places derives various halachas from the equation between paraduma and a carbon. It's what you'd call a carbon chutz, not a carbon pnim. It's not brought in the migdash. It's sort of like you compare it to the soil azaza, which is avodas chutz. In any event, because the Torah gives the appellation of chatos to paraduma, it indicates that paraduma is a mechaper. And that's the equation to misas tzadikim, in this case misas Miriam, that the misa is mechaper. Now we have to understand, and I heard it from my Rebbe many times, there are two categories of kapara. There's kaparas hayachid and kaparas hatzibur. In this context, we're clearly discussing kaparas hatzibur. And that's because we're talking not about someone in particular who did tshuva or brought one of the mechaprim, brought a carbon, but rather we're talking about the misa of a tzaddik and how it impacts on the entire generation and generates a kaparas sibur. And this might be one of the reasons why on Yom Kippurim we read the Asara Ruge Malchus, the Arte Alavana, because we want to engender a zechira of misas tzaddikim. Now, how exactly the Misa of Tzaddikim generates kapara, that's not clear. That requires a lot more Pnimius HaTorah. Amar Rabbi Loza, Lama Nisbacha Misas Aaron Lebigdei Kahuna. We find that the Torah gives us both in Sefer Bamidbar Perek Chaf, it gives us the story of the death of Aaron together with the mitzvah of Bigdei Kahuna. And this touches on the equation between Aaron and his goal and his contribution to Klal Yisrael and that of the Bigdei Kahuna. Ma Bigdei Kahuna mechaprim, this is Sugin Erech and Adaf Tezayin, that every single one of the Bigdei Kahuna has its own unique kapara. For example, we speak about the rimonim, which are on the bottom sides of the tunic, and those generate a kapara for lashon hara. And we talk about the choshen that the Kohen wore on his breast, and that's an atonement for ivus hadin, for mishpat shalom kaseh. Anyway, each one of the Bigdei Kahuna is a mechaper, and so too the misa of Aaron is a mechaper. Now, why do we need both the story of Miriam and the story of Aaron? They both seem to be teaching the same exact thing, that Misas Tzadikim Mechaperes. That's a discussion amongst the Mefarshim. Turn around, we learned in Brisa, Ma Pisom. Mace Pisom, a person dies on the same day that he took sick. Zu Misa Chatufa. That's called an abrupt Misa. Chol Yom Echad, if he lives for one day and then he dies, that's Misa Dechufa. Tosus here, it's a very short Tosus. Chatufa, Dechufa Lo Yadana Mai Shna. I don't know what the difference is between the two. Uminole, and where do we derive it? So we have Chatufa and Dechufa. If I had to say anything here, which of course I hesitate to say anything because it doesn't understand the difference, but I think the concept of Chatufa, like for example, the Gemara speaks about an Amein Chatufa. Amein Chatufa means that something could have had a lot more meaning had it been extended, but instead it was shortened abruptly. And that's like an Amein Chatufa. Instead of saying Amen, Kel Melch Naman, right? Amen. He said Amen. That's Chatufa. He didn't let it flesh itself out. And this person died abruptly. I mean, we didn't even get a chance to hear from him what he hoped and aspired his legacy to be. If a man has one day of illness, that's a very short death period, but it's the chufa, it's push. But it still has some element of preparation for death. Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel Omer, though he misas magefa, that if a person dies a misa dechufa, then he died as a result of a magefa. Shenemar, how do we see this? In Yechezkel, Ben Adam hineni lokech mimchas machmari magefa, and Hashem already tells Yechezkel his wife is going to die. She's machmari necha, and he was prohibited to manifest avelus, nihugi avelus. Adaber el ha'am ba'boker b'tamas ish ba'erev. His wife died on that same evening. That's called Misa Hatufa. And how did she die? She died from a plague. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the Gemara means here by Magefa. Does it mean an actual plague? Or just the word Magefa is a borrowed term that's being used in this context of a death, of an illness of one day? That's called a plague. Now, Shnei Yomim, if he lives for 2 days and then he dies, Zui Misa Dechuya. So he translates here Misa Dechuya as a hurried death. Shlosha, if a person dies after 3 days Ge'ara, Arba Nazifa. Again, it's very difficult to know the difference between a Ge'ara and a Nazifa. But Chamisha, Zui Misas Kolon. If a person is ill and dies 5 days later, that's the average death. And therefore, we're not seeing here anything that's out of the ordinary, out of the natural order of events. So therefore, we don't attribute this to some sort of a plague, a sudden death. It's not related to an onish kares. It's 5 days and then you die. Amar Reb Chanin, Mikra. How do we know from the Torah itself that Chamisha is a natural death? And this is based on Moshe Rabbeinu again. At the end of the Chumash, Hashem reveals to Moshe, Hein, Karvu, Yomech Lamus. Hein is Chan. It has to do with the Greek language. And karvu is tre, is 2. Yomecha is also tre. So you add 1 plus 2 plus 2, you get 5. Chamisha. And hein chad, how do we know that the word hein means 1? She came to Lashon Yevani, korim the achas hein. Beis b'chamishim shana, he died exactly at 50. Later, the Gemara is going to change this, but right now the Gemara is assuming that you died at the age of 50. Zoe misas karex, chamishim shtayim shana, zui misaso shel shmuel aramasi. So Shmuel was certainly not chayiv kares, and he died at the age of 52. So on his 50th birthday, he was yotza mechlal kares. Shishim, if he dies before the age of 60, so he lived past kares, zui misa b'dei shamayim. So that's also a divine punishment because he died before his 60th birthday. And we'll see later that there were chachamim that made a party, a birthday party at the age of 60. Yatsa mechlal misa, meaning misa b'dei shamayim. Now the Gemara in Tainus on Daf Hey establishes that Shmuel died at a young age. He was only 52 because his Talmud Muvak was none other than Shaul, and Hashem wanted to spare Shmuel the agony of witnessing the death of Shaul. And we're going to see this theme over and over again, that God takes a life sometimes prematurely in order to spare that person, like we're going to see later on about Yoshio Melch, or was it Tzidkiyahu Melch, about seeing the Churban Abayis, Yoshio. In any event, Omar Mazutra, my crop. How do we see that if a person dies before the age of 60, it's a divine providence and a punishment, and it's Misa B'dei Shamayim? And here we're going to have a gematria. Tichsiv, it says in Eov, Tavo v'kelach ele kava. You will go to the grave at a mature age. In other words, you'll pass Misa B'dei Shamayim. And bekelach, bigamatria shitin. The word bekelach is 60. Shivim seva, if a person dies at the age of 70, that's considered old age. And this is the Mishnah Masechet Avos. And Shmonim, if he dies at the age of 80, Gvuros, that he's reached the level of Gvuros. T'chsiv, Yemei Shnosenu Bahem, a pasuk in Tehillim, Bahem Shivim Shanavim, the Gvuros Shmonim Shana. Omar Rabba, Michamishim Yad Shishim Shana, Zui Misas Kares. The entire decade, from 50 to 60, if he dies during those years, that is kares. Now, if that be the case, getting back to Shmuel Hanavi, he died a mis of kares. The price didn't mention 50 to 60, it mentioned 50, between Podo Shel Shmuel Haramasi, to sort of hide the fact that Shmuel, on the surface of it, seems to have died a misas kares, which is not true at all. He wasn't chai for any avera, but he died prematurely so as to spare him the witnessing of the death of Shaul. Rav Yosef Kiava Bar Shitin, Ovid Lu Yoma Tavad Rabbanan, Omar Naftali Mikaris. So Rav Yosef celebrated his 60th birthday with a big banquet, and he declared, I'm beyond kares, I've survived. And this appella, because it seems like Rav Yosef himself may have been afraid of a misas kares, which tells us that even the tzaddikim are doing tshuva. So Amalei Abai, wait a minute, I think this banquet is premature. Why? Nehi de nofakle mar mikares, this shani mikares de yome mean nothing. Kares is one thing in terms of your age, but there are other expressions and manifestations of kares, like, for example, a misa techuya, a misa chadufa. How many days were you ill before you died? Amalei, and now Rav Yosef responds to Abai's challenge. Nekotlach mia palga biyad. You know what? I'm celebrating half of kares, meaning half of the fact that I passed kares. If I reach the age of 60, then that dimension of kares, as far as how many days it'll be before I die, that will have to wait and see. Rav Huna noch nafshik biso. Rav Huna died away suddenly. Havakai daige Rabbana. The Rabbana were very upset, very worried about it. People are going to start saying that Chas v'Shalom, Rav Huna had averos, and this sudden death was a punishment for those averos. And maybe it was Chayv Kares. Tanalu Zuga de Mahadayav. Again, Mahadayav is a place. Mahadayav. So there's a pair of Talmidei Chachamim, and they came from that place, and they gave us the following brayso: Lo shanu el shelo higia legvuros, aval higia legvuros zui misas neshika. Once a person reaches the age of 80, if he dies suddenly, that's called misas neshika. And that we saw by Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. They had misas neshika, and they all died suddenly. We don't know any sickness, neither of Moshe nor Aaron or Miriam. And yet they were not chayv kares. And the answer is because they experienced misas neshika. So in other words, if you die between the age of 50 and 59, that's called kares. If you die at the age of 60 up until 79 and it's sudden, that's called kares. But if you die at the age of 80, then even if you die suddenly, that's not considered kares. Or if you die after the age of 60, it's not kares of shanim. Omar Rava Hani b'ni chaye b'ni umezone lo b'schusatai bisal b'mazolatai. This is a Gemara at the end of Masechet Shabbos in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina is the one who says that mazel and its influence is irreversible. Again, Rabbi Yochanan maintains a different view, that through Tefillah Ma'asim Tovim you could change your mazel. But according to Rabbi Chanina, you're really determined by the destiny of the mazel. And Rava here agrees and reflects that sheet of Rabbi Chanina, that the length of a person's life, that's called chai. Bonai means his children, and mizoni is livelihood. This is all determined by mazel, not by merit. Let's compare the lives or the deaths of Rabba and Rav Chizda, both of whom are presumably on the same level of tzidkus. Mar mitzale v'osi mitra, umar mitzale v'osi. They were both on such a great level that with that prayer, rain came down during the drought. Rav Chizda chaya tishin v'tartin shnin, and yet Rav Chizda lived a long life till 92. Rabba chayar boy, Rabba died at the age of 40. Furthermore, ki Bei Rav Chizda shitin eluli, Bei Rabba shitin tichle. Whereas Rav Chizda celebrated with his children, grandchildren, etc., 60 weddings, Rabba, on the contrary, had 60 bereavements. That means deaths of children and grandchildren. Furthermore, Bei Rav Chizda, Smida lekalbe, v'lomit boibi, Rabba, Nahama, Irilinchi, v'lomishtakah. In the household of Rav Chizda, they were able to feed the dogs the finest of flour. I'm wondering here in Katan what they feed the dogs. But in Rabba's household, they fed barley flour to people, to human beings, and there was not enough to be found. And the answer is, it's all totally b'masa. Two people, Rabba and Rav Chizda, both saintly, and look at the different lives in terms of Banai Chayim Zonim. And the Gemara at the end of Shabbos seems to indicate that with regard to Klal Yisrael, Tefillah, Ma'asim Tovim, they can overcome the influence of the Mas. That sheet honestly does not seem to be reflected here in ours. There are three things that I asked for from heaven. I got two, but not the third. The Rav Huna. I asked for the wisdom of Rav Huna. And I got it. The Utrei, the Rav Chizda, the wealth of Rav Chizda, and I got it. Yovile, I received both. However, in Venuse, the Rabba Barav Huna, lo Yovile. I asked for what's the Gemara calls it Anvenuse. It's hard to know exactly what Rav had in mind here when he prayed for Anvenuse. Well, I don't know how he's praying to get any Midah Tova from Shemayim. Kol b'dei Shemayim chutz miyira Shemayim. But it probably means that God would make it a little easier for him through his own Isarusa, his own work, to achieve that goal. Rav Siorin Achua, a strange name, Rav Siorin was his name, and he was Achua de Rava. Here's a little bit of a sad story over here. Havi Yosef Kami de Rava. He was sitting in front of his brother Rava. The impression you get Rav Siorin may have been older than Rava, I'm not sure. And Rav is on his deathbed. He sees that he's slipping away. Amalei. So Rava says to his brother Rav Siorin, talk to him. Who is him? Him is the Malach HaMavos. And ask him not to hurt me, meaning that my death should not be painful. Amalei, Rav Siorin said to Rav in return, Mar lav shushbinehu. Why are you turning to me to tell the angel of death? Why don't you tell the angel of death? Aren't you his friend? Rava was acquainted with the Malach HaMavos, and he would communicate with the Malach HaMavos. So Rav Siorin wanted to know, why are you asking me to address the Malach HaMavos? Why don't you address him directly yourself? Amalei, Rava responded, Kevan de imsar mazola lo ashkechu. Since right now my mazel, meaning my future life, and in this case death, has been handed over to the Malach HaMavos, he's not going to pay any attention to me. Amalei, so Rav Siorin says to Rava, Lischazili mar, after you die, please appear to me in a dream. And Rav Siorin was very curious to know whether or not his prayers or his request that he addressed to the Malach HaMavos was accepted or not, and Rav died an easy death. So Rava appears in front of Rav Siorin, his brother. Amalei, Rav Siorin asks him, Havi lamar tsara, did you have a very difficult death? Amalei, Rava responded, Ki rivda ukisil. There used to be a kli, a kind of a sharp kli called kisulta that was used by the bloodletters, those who were mages down. They took the blood out of a person. That was a way of lowering your blood pressure. So he says it's as if a lancet, that kli was just made a puncture. It was basically a very light kind of pain. Rava Yosef Kami to Rav Nachman. Now we're going a little back in history. And Rava is sitting in front of Rav Nachman, and he sees Rav Nachman is slipping away. Amalei. So Rav Nachman turns to Rava and he says, please address the Malchamavis. And he asked him not to hurt me. Amalei Mar Lav Adam Choshev. Aren't you an important person? Rava asks Rav Nachman in a rhetorical question. Why don't you speak directly to the Malchamavis? Amalei man chashiv, man sfin, man rakir. Who can consider himself important or awesome or exalted in front of the Malach HaMavis? Amalei, Rav now turns to Rav Nachman and he says, "L'schazi limar, I will address the Malach HaMavis on your behalf, but show up in a dream." And it's Chazili. After Nachman died, he appeared to Rav in a dream. Amalei, Rav asked him, Havile lamar tsara, did you suffer at the point of death? Amalei is very famous. Mishchal bin binasa binsa michalav. Chalava is chalav, is milk. And mishchal is to take something out of something. Binasa or binisa is a hair. It's like drawing a hair out of milk, meaning it was a painless death. The Amarli HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zil Bahu Alma Kadhavis Lo Be'ina Denafich Bisus. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to go back and live again and then die again, I would not want to do so. I'm afraid of the Malach HaMavis. Even though in the first round I got away easy. That's how Rav Nachman feels, because Rava probably intervened on his behalf with the Malach HaMavis. But who knows what's going to happen next time around? Rabbi Elazar Havikachel Truma is Chazile. The Malach HaMavis appeared to him. Now, if he would die while he's eating truma, he would be mitami the truma. Amalei, Rabbi Elazar made a deal with the Malach HaMavis. It's truma dekatlim alav kadosh ikri. It's cholfulei shait. For the moment, the Malach HaMavis gave up because he didn't want to create a tumah to the truma. Rav Sheshes is chazilei b'shuka. The Malach HaMavis appears to Rav Sheshes in the marketplace to take his life. Amalei b'shuka b'behema. In the marketplace with dead animal meat. That would be humiliation. He said, basically, come home into my house, and then you can take my life. He sought to die on his bed in an honorable fashion. Rav Ashi is chazile b'shuka. Amalei. Rav Ashi says to Malach HaMavis, Israch li talsin yomin. Give me 30 days. So that I can review my studies. You get the impression that he was chozer al shas every 30 days. Tiamriso Ashri Misha Balakam Talmud. I'm going to get up to heaven. They're going to ask me where my Talmud is. But the Malach HaMavis didn't wait till the end of the 30 days. Beyond Talmud, already on the 30th day, also he comes. Hamalei Rav Ashi says, "My kuliyai, what's the rush? I asked for a stay of 30 days. You gave me a stay of 30 days. And the answer is, Kadachka Ragli de Barnosan. This Barnosan, who is meant to take your place and take over Rav Ashi's position. And this is the leadership of the community of the Jewish nation in Bavan. And Ein Malchus no gas bechavet afil kimole nema. When it's time for someone else, we can't push him away, even a hair's breadth. In other words, in Shemaim, they're not going to allow one leader to extend, even for a moment, his leadership if it's been determined and designated for his successor. So the Rav Ashi had to die to make way for Rav Huna bar Nosson. Rav Chisda lo avi yochel. Rav Chisda was such a powerful person that the Malchamos could not approach him because Rav Chisda never stopped learning Torah. Avi shasik kumim begirs. Solik Yosef Bi'arza the Beirav. Malchamos is smarter than anyone. He goes up onto a cedar tree. Arz of a shas. And the tree splits. Rav Chisda took a little break to see what's going on. He heard the loud noise of a cedar tree splitting. V'yochle, and then the Malchamos took him over. And he died. Rav Chia lo havi motzi lemikarvale. Another case of the Malchamos who cannot successfully take the life of a great tzaddik, Rabbi Chia. Yom achad idmile ke'anya. On one particular day, Malchamos shows up in front of Rabbi Chia in the guise of a poor person. Also, Torah Abava, he knocks on Rabbi Chia's door, Amalei, and he tells Rabbi Chia, apically rifta, get me a loaf of bread. Achile, they brought out a loaf of bread to this pauper, who's really Malchamos. Amalei, v'lav kamarachem mara anyo. He asked him the rhetorical question, don't you have mercy on the poor? And clearly you have mercy on the poor. Galilei. Then he revealed himself to Rabbi Chia. Achvile shota denura, and he shows him a rod of fire. At that point, Rabbi Chia realized who is the true identity of this person who appeared like a poor person. Amtzile nafshe, and Rabbi Chia gave up his life to the person.